Right, welcome everybody to the Council of Governors. Bright and early in the autumn, 1st of September. The good thing about being the 1st of September is it's nice and early in September. The bad thing is a lot of people still on holiday. So let's have apologies, please, Anu.
I've got Suzanne Rankin, Merrick Vivers, Arun Thiagarajan, and Chris Ketley.
Okay, any governors?
No.
Wow, well done, the governors. Sinead, that's interesting. Right, so any declarations of interest, please, for anything that's on the agenda? No? So let me do some welcomes. I think welcome first Council of Governors to Chris Kane, Non-Executive Director. My camera's not on, but welcome, Chris. And any other welcomes before I go into the Governor procedures, Anu?
We have Denise Saliagopoulos and Mark Adams has just joined us. So Denise has taken over from Rose Chandler as appointed Governor for Spelthorne. And Mark Adams has taken over from Iftikhar Chowdhury as appointed Governor for Runnymede.
Thank you. And so welcome back, Denise, and welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see, Sinead, that you've joined us.
I have. Thank you, Chair. Hello.
I wasn't expecting you, Sinead, as Tim Oliver had told us that you weren't going to come anymore.
Well, he hadn't shared that with me, so let's make this my last meeting then.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me know, Andy.
No, right. No, I'd assumed that was knowledge there within Surrey County Council, but Surrey County Council apparently going to have the elected representative at ICS level, not at the individual FTs. But you are most welcome to for this your meeting, final meeting then, and a few others who are going to depart before the next meeting on the beginning of December. You will have seen the note that came round from Neil Adolphus. Neil's got quite a lot on his plate at the moment, and you'll have read that note. But thanks to him for what he's been doing for us. And so obviously there'll be an election there, due course. Chris Marks, I think you've decided that you won't be standing again. We're very, very sad about that. But thank you so much for all that you've added to the council. And Sinead we've mentioned. And I think, have I missed anybody? Only one, very important one. And Danny, you're going to come to the end of your 3 terms in November, and obviously as lead governor as well. I think you've been with us since the beginning of December 14, which is a long time ago. And you took over lead governor in July 2018. And I've been personally very appreciative of the support you've given me as chairman of the Council of Governors, as well as chairman of the trust during that time. We will, of course, have you in before the end and say goodbye properly, but as this is the last formal council meeting, I just wanted to say a big thank you to you for all you've done. I can't think of a more passionate supporter of Ashford St Peters in so many different ways, and really huge thank you. But we will be doing something, pandemic permitting, a bit nearer the time.
Thank you.
Okay, have I missed anybody, Anu?
Just that we're expecting a few visitors, and I can see just the top of my head. I think Andy had joined us, Andy Brown. So we have the elections are underway, and we were expecting a few visitors from potential governor candidates during the meeting. I can't see anyone else at the moment.
Okay, so welcome to all visitors. You're most welcome, and we will now get on with the proceedings. Okay, so the minutes of the previous meeting. Has anybody got any comments on the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of June? No, for some reason didn't download into my meeting book, but they are there on admin control. Okay, can we take those as agreed then? Great, thank you. Matters arising. Any matters arising, Anu?
Matters arising. The links to the Pride in Nursing and Midwifery Day were shared with the governors, and with regards to when patients would be able to provide feedback, and this is through the Viewpoint portal. I understand from the head of patient experience that Viewpoint is being aligned with a new divisional structure, and but every inpatient and outpatient does receive an SMS text asking them to provide feedback through the same survey that way.
Okay, thank you for those. That's good updates. Thank you. In which case we will move on to the feedback from the governors. Governor activities, Danny.
Yeah. Yes, well, you'll have read the governor activities. We are all involved in the virtual meetings, which have been continuing. And there really is very little else to say, except that I will say that I'm involved in the retreeing or the regreening of Ashford, or St. Peter's and Ashford. But that's an ongoing thing. But yes, as you see, we have been continuing, and presumably will be for some time to come.
Yes, and I think we will be continuing kind of virtually at the moment. You'll be aware of the case rates, and obviously David will probably say something about that in due course. But we may, even board meetings at the moment, we are struggling to find a place that's big enough to have enough of social distancing to have the board together. Although we may be going to friends at local authorities who've got council chambers to try and get that. But the likelihood is most committee meetings and council governor meetings for the time being will remain virtual. The other issue being certainly at St. Peter's and probably Ashford as well, Surrey Safe Care is taking a lot of the meeting space up because there's an awful lot of work going on in those places. So that's the background. So any questions for Danny on anything that the governors have been doing? A very clear paper at 5.1 there on the various activities. Okay. In which case, thank you, Danny. And we'll move on to Chris with the PEG report. Thanks.
Hi. Sorry, my microphone switch was hidden. I didn't see that I was unmuted. I hope that I haven't been causing any noise up to now, but since no one said mute yourself, I guess I haven't. I will try to be as almost as brief as Danny. I always fail in doing that, but I'll try my best. PEG, as usual, had interesting visits. As you know, there's sort of virtual visits now. And the last PEG meeting, we actually had two. The first was a really interesting and topical report, which I'll focus on, from Susan Holton and Paul Bostock on the work being done on improving processes for outpatient appointments. And that was something that governors were very interested in, as there's been quite a bit of feedback on the appointments process, duplicate appointments, some confusion over appointments, etc. But it was really heartening to hear about the work that was being done to improve on outpatient appointments processes. Two of us from the group were joining with the work on that, and I can report that a really heavy program of work has started. There have been 3 meetings, one of which has included myself and Shirley, and others which are happening with the those of you on the ground in the trust, the employees. And the governors were very grateful for the detailed and positive presentation that really helped to see what the future for outpatient appointments was going to look like, and I look forward to delivery on the ground. The other report was also very interesting, and links back to something I'll say in a second that Chris Marks has been focusing on, but was that this one was on junior doctors and explaining to us the way in which junior doctors are inducted into the trust and supported through their years of further training, having graduated from their degree programs. I just mentioned Chris Marks. Chris has been very keen on us looking at the positives, the compliments that are received in the trust, as well as the kind of issues that are flagged up in quality reports. And I think I hope that I'm not speaking out of turn if I say that I think we were all very positively impressed with the work that's being done with junior doctors and the way in which they're being supported in this trust. Like Danny, I would say that the report is the full report is laid before you, paper 5.2, and I think the standard issues they're obviously the most important for the hospital in terms of the quality report, but I think for today those are covered effectively in that report for you, unless people have any questions. Sanya, I wasn't as short as Danny, but I think that was a fairly brief report for you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've got some hands up. Let me just check. Colin?
Yes, Chris. It's reported, page 3, overall there were 80,000 fewer appointments compared to the previous year. What percentage is that? I mean, it's been suggested it's about 1 in 7, which would be 12 to 13%. And what would be the catch-up plan? And also looking at the high number of DNAs in video appointments, has that improved, or is there a plan for improvement on that?
Andy, I don't know if it's probably better for me to pass that over to one of your exec, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether we'll have the James. James is on. He's the man. James.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just answering the question about 80,000 appointments. I mean, I will cover this in more detail in the performance report. The issue is we did take down a lot of activity to support our COVID surge. So, we have long waiting lists for surgery and outpatients as a result of diverting staff to making the hospital ready for COVID and responding to COVID, as did every hospital in the country. So that's the reason for fewer outpatient consultations. We do about, I think it's in the region of 500,000 consultations a year in a normal non-COVID year. So prior to COVID, so that gives you a sense of the scale of it. And in terms of, you'll see in the performance report, we begin to look at a number of activities that we're doing to recover this position, which is involving extra clinics, locum doctors, working with the independent sector in a number of ways. So there are a number of things that we're doing to make up for that lost activity. And I think the last point was around DNAs of virtual appointments. I mean, I don't actually know where we are on that, on DNAs on virtual appointments today. The point is, though, that we are working very hard to make virtual appointments a sustainable, strong method of delivery for the future, not only because it's a government imperative that we do that. So there's a guideline that all hospitals are supposed to be working to 40% of consultations being virtual, but also there are a number of reasons we were trying to work on virtual consultations before COVID, because it makes a lot of sense for a lot of patients who don't need to travel, people don't need to get childcare, they don't need to take time off work, and it's much better for the environment if we don't have 500,000 people taking a trip to our car park. So there are a number of reasons why we're trying to make that improve it, and we'll do so going forward. We're putting a lot of time and thought into how we deliver all of those services going forward, and there will be more detail in the performance section.
Can I just add a couple of things from the report then on the DNAs? Firstly, that it was acknowledged that the letters were quite complicated, and I think one of the legs of work for the outpatient work that I referred to earlier is in simplifying and making clearer some of the messages which go out. I think that's hoped that will reduce the DNAs. Secondly, a question in the meeting was asked about what happens to people who don't attend, maybe because they have difficulty with the technology of doing online appointments, and the answer to that was that they would receive a telephone consultation, so they don't miss out. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, that the majority of DNAs on the virtual appointments were at the beginning of the pandemic period, and so the feedback that we had, and James might be able to confirm this, was that the situation was more difficult at the beginning, and now people are getting used to the method. The DNAs are reducing significantly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Chris. And we had to adopt this at a rate of change that we would never ever seek to do normally. So we did something in a matter of weeks that we would normally take probably 18 months. So there was a bit of an issue on occasion with some of the letters not being as clear as they could be, and the way that we were communicating that. But we've learned from those things, and as you say, Chris, that was at the start predominantly.
Thank you, James. And thank you, Chris. I see you've got another meeting on the 6th of September. Do you know which area that's going to look at?
Actually, I think we have another outpatient report on the 6th, and that will, I'm sure, provide us with some further update on the work that's been done to date and what remains to be done.
Okay.
You've also got a question for Lily.
Yeah, you've just spotted that, Lily.
Just a very quick one to James. Do we have any means to measure what this change to 40% of virtual appointments is going to do in terms of how we look at the impact of those outpatient appointments? I don't know how you measure the value of outpatient appointment, but presumably we need to get to understand what works, what doesn't work, and what is the impact.
That's really good point, Lily. That's a really good question, and it's absolutely spot on that there are some pathways and some diseases and patient cohorts where virtual appointments are less appropriate and will work less well, and we're learning that pretty quickly. And in fact, some of that early on was common sense. So we are, predominantly it's particular age groups. It's not the very elderly. It's not the very young. It's conditions that are that can be discussed over the phone where examination is not required. So we are working hard to target it at the right groups, and there is learning to do, Lily. There's definitely learning to do, because this is new and we're all in a new world. We would never have thought of having a meeting of this many people sat in our home offices and bedrooms like this, and this is the way forward. So we're learning, and we are making an effort to make sure that we get this right going forward. So there's a lot of work going on, Lily, but you're absolutely right to point to it.
Can I just one added thing, as a volunteer in the local library, one of the things that we have, for instance, is the private room, which at the moment is kind of a storage type room. But it is possible that other libraries have got the rooms where people could actually walk in if they don't have the facilities and use them for the consultations. And it strikes me as being a very good use of the facilities that the local councils would support. And it would also make the libraries far more important to the local communities as well.
I think, Lily, that's a good point for Tom to take on board, actually, with for place space, because we are always looking to get closer to people and looking for obviously closer relationships with the local authorities. So I think, Tom, if you want to just have a think about that and take that away. I'm going to have to kind of move on shortly, but I'll take a last one from Chris Marks.
Thank you, Andy. And I was going to ask it during James' performance report, but it seems appropriate now. Do we have any updates in terms of the improvements in the patient experience, given what Chris has just been talking about, and in your report about the talking of to the failures in the outpatient triaging and appointment booking process? And I wonder whether what we are seeing by way of improvements in that from the patient's point of view.
Yeah, I think that's two separate questions, isn't it, Chris? One about how patients view the appointments and one how they view the processes and the improvement in processes. So what we are looking to do, so we do the survey, we do the immediate feedback through the text message, but one things that we know we need to do going forward is work on understanding the effectiveness of virtual consultations. Now, the vast majority of what we do is over the phone, so it's not complicated. It doesn't require logging on and computers, but we do need to understand that and work on that. Once we get through the immediacy of the current challenges, we need to understand the effectiveness of that from a clinician point of view, the value added, and from the patient side as well. Now, it's fair to say that, we sometimes think that there's not, we need to question that as well in terms of the face-to-face appointments at the same time. But there's a piece of work to do there. We haven't done it yet, Chris, because we're working on some priorities at the moment. In terms of the feedback on the changes we've made around booking, it's too soon to tell at the moment. But we have got reps on that group, and we are seeking feedback in a more formal way as part of the overall programme. But at the moment, we haven't done that yet. We're still improving the process and getting on top of some of the immediate issues.
Okay. Thank you, James. Much appreciated. I'm sure it'll be a ongoing point of discussion at future council meetings. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm going to move us on now because we've managed to get 10 minutes over in the first couple of items. But on the other hand, we are addressing things that would have come up anyway in the performance report, so that's fine. Okay, so going to move on now to the assurance side, and David's going to take us through. The eagle-eyed amongst you will spot that the report is the one that was at the board meeting. And so those of you who looked at that before, so I'm sure David will be taking that as read and actually kind of pointing to the changes from that or talking you through those as we go. So I'm going to hand over to David. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And as you said, the report's in a number of parts. So I just want to identify. So there's going to be the assurance bit, an update, and then I won't steal Simon's thunder. He'll give you a finance update towards the end. So as Andy was saying, this is a summation of the sub-board committees up to July, and it's executive view, and it's good that we've got the chairs of a lot of those meetings around us. I also note that last time people were very keen to see more about the board assurance framework, and if you look at Appendix 1 and 2, that includes our risk appetite and also a summary of the board assurance framework. But I suppose take it in the round, and I'm very happy to take questions about the report going forward. But you can see that and this is a report from July, but even at that time, there were an increase in risks about the delivery of the quality of care on a number of separate and, well, they're all related in some ways to COVID. So the first thing to say is that we went through a relatively low period of community infection with COVID, but we've seen that generally rise since the measures the restrictions were reduced, and despite schools breaking up, people have been mixing a lot, and that's led to more transmission. We've had the emergence of various variants which are more transmissible, and we've also got the vaccination, the immunity that people have developed is waning to a certain extent in preventing transmission. It's been very effective at reducing serious disease in people, but actually it is waning, and that's why there is talk about booster vaccinations coming forward. And I suppose the things that are also highlighting the pressure on the hospital are the backlog. Lily was talking about the backlog of outpatient appointments, but particularly in elective surgery, which is coming through, and also the unprecedented increased demand we've had through the accident and emergency department. So attendances have been up by about 20-25%, and I know James will go more into that in the performance report. Those things are putting pressure on the delivery of care. The other thing to say is that we have COVID, but also we've got the impending respiratory syncytial virus. So we saw that in the southern hemisphere having an increased rate of 50%, and that's essentially because young children have been shielding at home or not mixing so much, and therefore there's a lot of people who haven't got the immunity to come forward. And the concern is that when the schools do go back, we will start seeing a significant rise there. And also we've got the prospect of flu, and we don't really know what flu's going to hold for us. What we do know is that during the first wave, flu was almost eradicated, but what that does mean is that we're not sure exactly which emergent strain will come through. So there's three things that may coalesce around that. And I suppose what that's doing, and I know Louise is on the call somewhere, is that that's having a big effect on our staff. The staff have been working very hard for a long period of time. They've been unable to take holiday, and now we have got some who need to go on holiday, but that leaves the others short-staffed. So there is mounting pressure on our staff, and clearly we put lots of mitigation in place to support them and protect them. And Louise's team have been doing an enormous amount of work in that area. So I think that I think in summary, you can see that it is a report which identifies that there is a lot of increase in risks and pressure on the system, and therefore subsequently on the staff. And I know later on, Simon will just talk about the impact that will be having on finance, and he'll also talk a bit about Surrey Safe Care. So I'll take that first bit, and happy to take questions at that stage, and we'll be grateful for any of the chairs of the various subgroup committees or the executives to join in if there's questions.
Thank you, David. So questions on David's report, or indeed on anything he's just said in terms of updates? I'm guessing James will be giving us some facts and figures later anyway.
Yeah. Lily, I think.
Lily.
Yeah, just a very quick one. I know that agency staff is always an issue in general. How is that at this particular moment impacting what and how you can work?
So you're right that it's not just us who's had to work extra hard through this time. So agency staff have been utilised throughout the whole healthcare system. So there is a shortage of staff in certain areas. So that is impacting. There are two ways we get additional staff. One is from bank staff, which is usually our own staff doing overtime, and the other is agency and bank which work in other organisations. And I think both of those we are finding pressure on. Although Louise's team did an enormously brilliant job in recruiting, so lots of areas such as nursing and particularly midwifery really filled their numbers before we went through this. So there's been some good groundwork that's put in place. But the issue we have is that staff are tired, they do need to go on holiday, and also we're very busy, which means that we need additional work than we would have normally. Louise, is there anything else you want to add from that if she's on? She may not be there.
I think she might be joining a bit later.
Okay. All right.
So Michael next.
Oh, thank you, Andy. David, I wondered if you could amplify a little bit. In the middle of page 5 of the report, talking about cancer, you say that the trust is compliant in 3 areas, 3 of the 7 core areas, but only one of the 4 non-compliant areas is actually identified. That's the 4-week rule, the 2-week rule. Now, is it possible that you could amplify a little on the other 3 areas where we're not achieving compliance?
I mean, I think James is going to cover this in his performance report, but do you want to quickly mention it now, James, or do you want to leave it to the performance report?
Should we? Why don't Michael? I try and answer it in the performance report, and if you don't think I have, you can come back to me. But I think I cover that. I think I answer exactly your point in the performance report.
I shall wait for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Colin.
Yes, the last page of the report, which is the summary. You've said there's some tangible evidence of degradation, which there's significant cause for concern. Could you elaborate on that a little, please?
Yeah, I think that there is no doubt that delays in treatment for any reason is a degradation in care that we're giving patients. So we have seen some delays in care. We are catching up with, I mean, and again, James will talk about in his report about what the waiting times for diagnostics and treatment is, and any delay in that situation is of concern. I think that I think patients quite rightly now are keen to get on with treatment that's been delayed through the pandemic. We've looked through. If you look through the quality report, there are some things that are now emerging, such as we did have some nosocomial spread. We've been very low on the amount of nosocomial spread within the organisation before the measures that we put in place. And in fact, we hadn't seen any for months. Now, with the busyness, we are seeing a little bit of that coming through. So infection is there, and busyness and tiredness of staff will have an impact.
Thank you.
Any other questions for David on the first part before we go on into the we'll do the finance next, and then we'll do James's performance report after that. No, thank you, David.
So Andy, do you want me to just go through a quick update between the finance report? Would you like the finance report next from Simon?
Do you want to do the quick update and then we'll do Simon?
Yeah, I suppose the only things to draw your attention, there's a whole things which we're, I think a lot of them will be covered further in. I suppose it's just to highlight, we discussed in the report the fire we had at Ashford. It did damage some of our theatres, but actually the response was really excellent by the staff in controlling that, and the measures were put in place, and that was extinguished. And repair work has been ongoing in Ashford to get those theatres up and running. I'd also like to just talk about Shashi Irakula. So we've just recently appointed Shashi. He's the divisional director for surgery. He's going to be my deputy, and you can see a little bit about his bio, but he's going to help me, and you may well see him at some of these governors' meetings when I'm not available. And we do talk about education in the report as well. And I suppose there's a couple of things just to talk about the education. One is to, I think if a lot of you come on site now, you'll see how much has changed on the site actually. So so we had the car park, which was a very big building at the start of this, and people can park now very easily. If you go into the education department, you can see there's been some amazing developments in education, and the simulation suite is something to have a look around, and it's co-located with the changes in terms of the catering for staff. So it's a fantastic step forward there. We, myself and Andy, joined the educational awards when our staff were given awards for their educational efforts, and that was a really fantastic step forward. And we also recently met the Bourne Academy. The Bourne Academy are responsible for supporting a whole series of schools in our area, and actually we're looking at ways of working with them together. And that was that was a really fantastic meeting with them as well. I think I'll leave it there. I know that Tom's going to give us an update on the strategy refresh, which is mentioned here, and I'll ask Simon just to give a bit of an update about Surrey Safe Care at the end of his finance report. But happy to take any other questions about the things. Oh, and the only other thing, James, is that it might just be worthwhile talking about the COVID star in the book. I think you'd love to do that as well. So
Yeah,
we'll get James to do that first. He loves this bit, and it's a
Yeah.
fantastic.
yeah.
Who's going to cover the clinical assessment unit, David? Just the fact that it's now up and running and etc.
Yeah, well, yeah. In terms of big buildings, you're right, Simon. I missed out the biggest building, Andy. I missed out the biggest building that we'd built, which is the clinical assessment unit. And again, the quality of that building is absolutely fantastic. We've opened up the ambulatory care, which is on the bottom floor. There are plans to move the urgent treatment centre in there quite shortly, which is a very great environment for not only our staff but our patients as well. And we've moved into the clinical assessment unit upstairs, which is where all the assessment is going, and James will just talk about the little boost that gave to our performance. But again, that's going really well, and again, it's a fantastic environment for staff and patients.
Okay, thanks, David. So let's Simon, do you want to come in on the finance side before we let James loose on the performance?
Sure. You can hear me, can't you? So page 5 is the finance information that was reported to the end of June, so month 3 that was in the July round. I'll refer to page 16 because we managed to get the month 4 figures into the detail section. So if I could just refer you to page 16, that's got that financial position to the end of June. It's fair to say June was slightly more challenging. We got through the first quarter pretty much as expected and in line with plan, but for the first time we've tipped over slightly by about £500,000 in month 4. That's not because of the costs we're spending. It's mainly down to our income recoveries through something called the Elective Recovery Fund. This is where the government is paying for the backlog clearance activity that James and David and others have alluded to early on in the meeting. Our recoveries weren't quite as high as we expected, largely because the levels at which those monies kick in was reset by the government for July. So we need to do more work with the system. We probably won't see an improvement in August, but hopefully we will do again in September when everyone's back from leave. We just need to keep a careful eye on that revenue kind of position at the moment, really. On the capital side, we highlight in there that we're a bit behind. Clearly, with all the shiny new buildings that have arrived, there's a good deal of spend in progress, and we're not particularly highlighting any variances for the end of the year. We believe we'll get back on track. Same position with the Surrey Safe Care sort of programme in terms of the costs. I think in the report we talk very much about Surrey Safe Care going live in December. We have hit a slight hiccup just recently. We are having to do some corrective actions, and we'll be discussing with the board that timetable over the next few weeks. So I guess just an early watch out for any changes to that. But the overall programme is still progressing pretty well. A lot of the design work is finished, and we're deep into the testing of those new systems and the kind of data loads that feed into those. So things like all the outpatients bookings going forward, some of the stuff you've been talking about earlier, all those systems and processes are deep in the testing phase as well. So a lot of work across the trust, and despite the pandemic, despite all the other changes, we're still managing to deliver that programme. So a huge amount of good work going on there.
Simon, just to add for the governors, because the governors will be interested in what the non-executives are doing with regard to Surrey Safe Care, and in addition to our own digital committee, which is obviously tracking it, Chris Ketley is the joint chair of the kind of overall assurance for the programme. Is that, I'm not quite sure what that committee is called, Simon, but
it's the joint digital committee, essentially.
Joint digital committee. So
radically named.
He co-chairs that with one of the Royal Surrey non-executives. I'm on that committee as well, and it's safe to say that we are being kept well up to speed with the progress and indeed, the latest issue that Simon's alluded to. And as I say, that's in progress at the moment. There's a board call on Friday, and over the next week or so, we'll know what any implications are. But it's just a heads up at this stage. But yeah, the non-execs, and in particular, I'd like to praise Chris Ketley, isn't on the call, so he can't get big-headed about it. But praise Chris Ketley for the time he's been devoting to it, which is extraordinary, really, for a non-executive. Okay, so any questions for Simon? Edwin?
Hi, just a quick question about Safe Care. So I'm guessing there'll be quite a good and extensive training program so can you give me a sense of how many staff will be trained and over what period?
Yeah, so essentially there's 10,000 staff across Royal Surrey and Ashford St Peters that all need training. They're all areas of staff, not just the clinical, doctors, nurses, therapists, but also the support staff. So a lot of people who work in those admin roles, a whole load of very specialist roles like clinical coders and those sort of things also affected. So that's 10,000 people that we're intending to train over about a 10-week period. And that training in its simplest form is about half a day of kind of e-training, remote training using computers you can do in your own time, and then a day of hands-on proper training in a kind of meeting room in person. On the clinical side of things, that second stage, that in-person classroom-based training, is a bit more in depth. So that's likely to be a couple of days to 3 days. That's particularly because we're introducing new arrangements like e-prescribing as an example, so that won't necessarily be as familiar, and those arrangements are obviously clearly important to get right. And then obviously our people change all the time, so new rotations of doctors or new joiners or leavers or all that side of things. So it's a bit of a moving environment, that kind of training, and obviously will continue well beyond go live and the start essentially. The key test for us is just getting that training done at the right time and close enough to the go live so people aren't having to do a significant amount of retraining or refreshers or those sort of things. But it's a big involved process, and yeah, lots of work going on behind the scenes to make that a success.
And I'm assuming there will be, because it's important from my experience to have like super users, people
sure
who forget how to use things, they could turn to.
So it kind of, with all these things, there's a cascade arrangement. There's about 30 of the most super users. It expands out to over 1,000 though of, still I'd call them super users, but people who really understand their areas, IT systems, requirements, processes, and all the rest of it, and they'll be helping training everybody else as well. So it cascades pretty quickly from 30 to 1,000 to 10,000.
And just one more question around IG. So what kind of issues around information governance have you encountered?
So a huge amount, but mostly at this stage, it's direct patient care that we're involved in. So that's a simpler set of rules and arrangements. But clearly behind the scenes, part of this training will cover IG requirements, refreshers, all that sort of stuff, the obvious stuff that you shouldn't be looking up people's information if you don't need it for that direct patient care. Our policies and procedures also get tightened again throughout this process. A lot of the paper-based stuff, obviously, we're removing, so that will change that guidance and arrangements. But there's a well-trodden path. The expectations are pretty well understood across the trust, but it is an opportunity for us to kind of reinforce the culture and the importance of IG throughout all these processes. So we want to go above and beyond really on those challenges, I think.
Thank you, Sam.
No problem.
So we've got the task of naming a super user then. Is it going to be super duper user or supra user? Anyway, Chris Marks.
Thanks, Andy. Simon, just a very quick couple of questions, if I may.
Sure.
One is you talk to the finance score reported as 2, but doesn't necessarily reflect the trust's underlying financial position. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit to what you see as the underlying financial position. And secondly, given the good news that the capital programme remains at 23.8 million, can you talk to what you see being completed in the 21-22 capital programme?
Sure. I'll take those in two things then. So in terms of our underlying financial position, the honest answer is very difficult to know what that is now, largely because the costs of running the hospital, I mean, clearly were 50 million more last year than they were in previous years, and all our arrangements are changing and are evolving. What's difficult to know is what the settlement with the government will be. It's still not announced for the second half of the year. There might be news as early as next week, but clearly we expect a tightening of that financial regime, and as a result, our underlying finances will come under pressure. You know, particularly as we try and restore more activity, outsource more work, and those sort of things. So I think, in all honesty, Chris, it's a watch this space on that financial challenge. There's some things we know, like efficiency targets and those sort of things, but yeah, the pace at which COVID expenditure might be unwound, or the degree to which, you know, additional costs of running extra elective surgery will be covered are just unknowns at this point. So sorry, I can't give you a better answer, but I think you've asked me that question before, so I'm sure I'll get it again next time when we meet. I'll try and give you a more thorough answer at that point. In terms of the capital side of things, obviously the biggest part of the capital scheme was the new urgent and emergency centre. So £9 million last year, £6 million this has been fully spent across that unit. The next largest area, it's about, well, probably 9 million. Actually, it's probably slightly bigger than that. About 7 million is the IT costs with the Surrey Safe Care, and there's about 2 million of kind of extra clinical equipment. So a lot of stuff that we're replacing or integrating. So things like, you know, automated nursing observations and computers on wheels around the site, all that sort of stuff is a big category in there. Everything else I'd consider really to be kind of normal activity. So replacement of equipment, there's a bit of extra costs have gone into Ashford, obviously, to create that ward, expand some of the critical care facilities over there, those sort of spend. I think we probably need to dig it out, but there's a full schedule of this in about the April minutes, I think. I'll give you that detail, but I'll be very happy to circulate the full schedule. But it's a you know, beyond those main schemes, it's a routine year of replacement assets, essentially.
Thank you.
Oh yeah. Sorry, one more. I did forget one. We spent about £1.5 million on electrical resilience across the St Peter's site in particular. So we've been carrying risks there for a long time. That's the start of a 3-year programme. So we're kicking that through, and that's improved NICU in particular in the maternity building as a big area of spend.
You won't be surprised, because I do frequently ask about it, what the status is on the improvements to staff accommodation. And I would ask Merrick, because he very kindly has been the purveyor of the information, but I noted he's not able to join us today.
I can update on that as well. So essentially, a couple of years ago, didn't we? We started those improvements about the staff accommodation, and if you visit the site, you will now see the first of those blocks behind Chertsey House has reached. I think the tiles going on as that phase goes, so it'll be watertight probably within the month or so. So certainly this side of Christmas, I'm expecting those facilities to start to open. It is the part of it, you know, it's part of a 3-year program though, so there's a big refurbishment and then the complete knockdown and replacement. I think it's Silverlands at the top of the site, but the bit behind the Abraham Cowley building gets replaced in due course. And then finally, if you look at the sort of private accommodation that's going on to the former West site is also progressing at a heck of a rate at the moment. So yeah, it's all good. It's all good news. Those external schemes are delivering what we expected now.
Thank you so much, Simon. Great news.
Okay, I'm going to have to move us on. I might just come back to kind of finance and system finance in the closed meeting, just to kind of flag that. James, performance report.
Thanks, Andy. You did want me to mention David asked me to mention the COVID star as part of his chief exec's report there. So the COVID star, something you will have seen, you may have seen some work we've done on this. Originally, David was thinking of a medal or something that we could give staff and to recognise the achievement and dedication that people have had during COVID. We've tried lots of ways of recognising this, but I come across a guy called Harry Gray. He's an artist of some national renown. He does big national pieces. He did a big piece for the RAF at Dover Cliffs, a big 15-foot sculpture of a Second World War man. He's done the gates at Twickenham, the Rose and Poppy gates, to commemorate the rugby players who were in the Second World War. And now he's done this COVID star, and we're really delighted to be working with Harry. We've got 5,000 of these stars ordered. They're like a really pretty brooch or medal that we pinned to people's, you can pin to your clothing that people may want to wear at work or may want to wear on special occasions. But we did quite a lot of work around the trust, asking people, trialing it, seeing what people thought of it. Harry's also done a lot of work as well with nurses and people in the NHS. So we're really excited to have this. We've bought 5,000 units, and actually Harry rang me today to say that the last of these, they're made by Thomas Fattorini in Birmingham, so we've actually encouraged jobs in the UK. They took on 3 apprentices to do our order, so we've created employment through this order as well. They rang me today to say that the order's complete. He's driving up to Birmingham to pick them all up, and he's been on the television and radio up there, and we did some radio a radio interview here as well. So it's really exciting. We get to give these. I think we're giving them to the staff sort of later on in the autumn. But it's a really nice piece that we'll be able to sort of share with our staff. They can keep and remember and tell generations to come what they did and what it means to them. So that's the COVID star. We're all very pleased about that. It's a great piece of work. So on to the
James.
Yeah.
I think it's also going to everybody who worked with us at that time, isn't it? Volunteers and
yeah, that's the idea.
So
yeah,
not just our staff.
No, there was lots of people that we really would like to. We really need to think about it. And I know Louise and the team have done lots of work around, because we're also complementing that. Louise has started doing a lot of work on a memory book, a yearbook, but and she'll probably talk about that in her area. But so there's a lot of work going on around who exactly we'll give it to and finding out who was working with us at the time and all of that.
Okay. And so James, with the forms for, I think you can take it as read, but could you just focus on what you want us to really, or want the governors really to ingest? Yeah,
of course. So on urgent care, the important point to note is the volumes. So David talked about that and alluded to that in terms of some of the impact that's had on us. June was the busiest month that we had. So April was the busiest April we'd had. May was the biggest May. June was the busiest month in terms of any attendances that Ashford and St Peter's hospitals have ever had. So we can forget winters, we can forget January. This was the busiest month that we've ever had in June. And in terms of ambulance attends, April was the highest number of ambulance attends we'd ever had. Then we beat that in May. That was the highest month we'd ever had. And then June was the highest number of ambulances we had. So 3 consecutive months we beat our own PB on how many ambulances arrived at the organisation. And June was the busiest month on record in terms of attendances. So the pressure on the organisation through the summer has been busier than any winter we've ever had in terms of attendances. So that should set the context for the rest of, when you read the paper around the achievements that were made in the other areas and the pressure that the organisation's under generally in terms of finances and the workforce implications of that. In terms of, we've talked about the urgent care build. So we've our clinical assessment unit that made a big impact over the bank holiday weekend when we opened the capacity. We posted some of the best performance in the region over the bank holiday weekend. But we've we've opened the building, and it's very, very exciting. And what it means is now that we've been able to put in some parts of our new clinical model. We've been able to invest in therapies, and some of that has already come online. So that's a very different way that we're able to treat patients up front in their pathways. But there's quite a lot of work to do now going forward on changing the clinical model, because this isn't all about a building. There's a lot around how we work to support patients and how our specialties work together in a different way as well. So we're working on those things, but that is a really exciting development. In terms of electives, I don't think that the governors have seen these standards before. And so I just wanted to point out, you've read the report, so it's just to say that actually the 18-week standard it isn't being focused on at the moment. What's being focused on is number of patients waiting over 90 weeks, then over 78, then over 52. So it's really worth just reflecting on what that means. So prior to COVID, prior to last March, we'd never had a patient over in this organisation. I think we'd ever reported one over 52 weeks, and we were compliant to 18 weeks. We're now nationally looking at 90 weeks, just under 2 years for the maximum wait. So COVID has had an enormous impact on backlogs of patients. So when we're talking about, we haven't done 80,000 consultations nationally, we're trying to manage what went from an 18 week wait to 90 week. So we're in a good position, but we've managed to only have 2 patients in June, and we've had a couple pop up subsequently that are over 90 weeks, but we're managing that well. We've made good inroads into those waiting 78 weeks, and you'll see in the paper that we've made good inroads in patients waiting over a year as well. We've done that through Ashford, predominantly bringing Ashford online. So we opened our new general surgery ward at Ashford. So that's a new thing for us. We've got 3 new theatres gone online at Ashford. So that was having a good impact until, unfortunately, we had the fire, which has taken one of those theatres out of the running. We've got a lot of overactivity, though. So when concerns of, and people have asked me questions around safety and what are we doing to try and get back some of these waiting times, we have been working weekends. We've got to feel the benefit of Ashford, which should be unaffected by acute pressures. So we've been doing weekends as well. We've been working with all of our local independent hospitals, and those not quite so local as well. So we're working with a hospital in London to do some of our specialist work and outsourcing to support us, as well as one in Kingston and our neighbouring hospitals. We've also got organisations who are coming in to work with us in our facilities to support us as well. So through those endeavours and locums and additional clinics and theatre that's in-house, that's how we're looking to recover some of these waiting times that you can see here. There is a line around the way that we've recorded. So when you go through the paper, you'll see highlighted in red some of the activity numbers. Now that was because the way that we record the activity, we were recording that the way that we did do through phase 3, which was the way that the government did it, DH and HSI. There was a change. Now at the point of writing this paper, we still weren't being told what the exact numbers were and how they were going to count and measure our activity, which is why we highlighted in red, because we knew it would be subsequent to change. However, we still didn't have a measure. We have subsequently, and we're comparing quite well against that. But that was just to highlight that the numbers in there are slightly different. In fact, our elective numbers are closer to 95%. But that wasn't due to us. It was due to waiting for the national guide on how to count the activity in a particular way. So that was a piece on elective care. On cancer, the same thing's happening as you can see on urgent care. It's just the volumes. So we for TWRs, although we've missed TWR and the 2-week breast, symptomatic breast, we're getting 30% more referrals for cancer at the moment for TWR. This is because of the backlogs and the work that didn't come in during some of the lockdowns. So with 30% more referrals in a month, it's taken us some work to get the capacity flexed up high enough to meet that quickly enough, and that's the only issue we've had there. In terms of our cancer patients waiting, that's gone up significantly. I can't remember the exact numbers, but our PTL prior to COVID was something like 1,200 patients. We've now got 1,700 patients waiting. So the fact that we had a slight dip in performance, but we're back again in July. We're meeting the 62-day standard, and we actually benchmark really well, actually performing 19th out of all the trusts in the country for 62 days. So that should give some assurance that we are on it. The other thing to note is in diagnostics is endoscopy and diagnostics. In the back of the report, you'll note that we're benchmarking pretty well against our diagnostic performance in the country, and we're making good inroads into not only the diagnostic waiting lists, but most particularly endoscopy, which was a challenge before COVID, was made considerably more of a challenge during COVID when we stopped all of that activity, and we've made a lot of effort to make inroads into that. And we've continued to do in the subsequent months as well. I think, Andy, I'll leave my narrative, and if there are questions, I'll take questions.
I think it's fair to say, James, that although comparatively we're doing pretty well, and actually Surrey Heartlands does pretty well quality-wise, that doesn't mean to say it's acceptable by the standards that were before COVID. And you wouldn't want to hide that COVID has had a huge impact right across the board on the NHS, and everybody knows that from the press. So it is good to know from an assurance point of view that we're doing pretty well, but that doesn't mean that we are sitting back, because actually there's still a lot of long waiters out there that the team are tackling. I think that's fair, isn't it, James?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's really tough for a lot of teams at the moment. It's certainly the management teams, because we've got delivering some of the busiest urgent care that we've ever seen, as well as the biggest restoration agenda that we've ever seen as well. So the teams are being pulled all over the place. But yes, we are working incredibly hard on that, and you can see that in the over 52s, the over 78 and the over 90s that we made really good inroads into. I think Julian's got his hand up. There's a few hands.
I think we've got, first of all, we've got Shirley, then we've got Julian.
Hi, James. My question was actually on the diagnostics. It's really encouraging to see that those endoscopy figures are improving, but we did put extra facilities in at Ashford, which we then withdrew. Could we understand the rationale behind taking those facilities back out while we still had a backlog?
Yeah, sure, of course, Shirley. So the extra facilities were actually put in at St. Peter's, not Ashford, but it does make a difference. You're absolutely right. We did have that's okay. We did have extra facilities. What we did when there were a number of things that happened. I won't go through them all, but there were a number of changes. There was a significant change in referrals. There was the introduction of fit testing, which is a fecal incontinence test that means that we can actually triage with greater actually which patients need endoscopy, which wasn't available. Literally, that's come online in the last year. So there were a number of factors that changed our demand profile, and it was more economic. It made more economic sense to make the decision we did, and to focus all of our activities on. We were doing a lot of outsourcing. We had additional facilities, brought that all into one place, and we focused that on one unit rather than two. Now we can see that we've made significant inroads into this agenda. So when we look at the endoscopy figures, they are making significant improvement. Mm-hmm. It's not that we've stalled in that improvement at all. Those numbers are coming down pretty solidly, and they continue to do so. July and August are continued improvement on that. They're well under 150, I think. So, it was the right thing to do, because we've got to be very careful with the money we spend, and so we focus it in that way. And if we weren't demonstrating continued improvement, then it would have been a concern, but we continue to make marked improvement on that.
Okay, thank you, James.
And Shirley, I think it's safe to say that at Modern Healthcare Committee, the execs were grilled extensively about that particular decision, with Marcin turning the handle, I think, on the grill. We were assured that it was the right thing to do in both cases, actually. It seemed counterintuitive, but actually once we got into the detail, it was there. And I can assure you that the Modern Healthcare non-execs really did go into that in some detail.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. James, considering the high number of patients that you mentioned that we have waiting for treatment, could you run through how we're ensuring any potential harm to patients is prevented and that patients have equitable access to the treatment they need, please?
Yeah, of course, Julian. So there are a couple of things. So you're absolutely right. The numbers that we have overall are going up significantly. We've got 31,000 patients waiting for treatment at the moment. I think we dipped down to 22,000 at one point. So our waiting lists are high. We've got about 5,000 patients waiting for surgery. So that's absolutely right, Julian. Waits are, and as I've described, getting pushed out, as are the volumes. There's a couple of things in the paper. You'll see a description of P2. So it's a new thing that the government have brought out that we've got here. P2 is a number of people who need an operation within 4 weeks. So all of our operations are categorised by our clinical teams with a timestamp in a way that they weren't prior to COVID because we didn't need to. Our waits were short. So P2 is a category that we look at all the time, and we look specifically at how many patients we've got over 4 weeks for P2. That's in the paper here, and you can see that that's coming down. So that's one way of doing it. The other way that we've got is in outpatients. We have an outpatient harm group that's chaired by our Chief of Patient Safety with me and a few other people on there. That looks at not only some of the issues that we've had in outpatients, but it's also looking at waiting times, the wait for first consultation for urgent patients. We've also got a clinical harm review process, and we've been very active with clinicians around recording things on Datex so that we can then wrap the team into support around duty of candour, clinical harm reviews, and other pieces around that.
Thanks
very
much,
Julian.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I'll come off mute first. Take a question from Edwin and then Jane, and then I think we've got to move on. Thanks, Edwin.
Just a quick question. As somebody who worked in equality and diversity previously, I'm looking at this report and thinking, well, we would like to see breakdown, to identify any areas where, for example, if it's cancer waiting and patients waiting over 62 weeks or days, whether any protected characteristics are kind of disproportionately affected. So I think we need to drill down, beyond these numbers into protected characteristics to see what, whether there's any overt or covert problems around equality and diversity and overrepresentation of certain groups. So it's
Thanks, Edwin. James, do you want to comment on that? Are we looking at that level?
So not at the moment, but we are working with Surrey Heartlands to consider that agenda. So that's one of the things on the elective. So there's a planned care board and there's an elective program board, both of which I'm on. And that is very much what the Surrey Heartland system are looking at. How do we understand that? How do we measure it, understand it? And so we are involved in that agenda, Edwin, although we haven't got the data here.
And I think it's legitimate to ask the Quality Committee to get involved in that discussion. Also, James, for you to feed back the Quality Committee and then the Quality Committee to see what they would like to see.
Yes, agreed, Andy. I'm just conscious that we need some assurance around that, and that we aren't at that stage at the moment. But I think you're right. We should have that discussion there about how that agenda is developing and what that's going to look like.
Jane?
It's just really to assure the governors that the Quality Committee, the issues around whether patients are coming to harm as a result of the delays and waits is something that we very much focus on and very much is part of our discussions with both James's report and the quality report. So we do keep a clear focus on that, and we are assured by the harm groups that have been set up to look at that. I think, Edwin, you make a good point around the diversity issue, and I think that's something we can look to in the future. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, James. In tough times, I think the summary is, and you can see that in the report from David, in what James is saying, very, very tough times. If you put together the impact of COVID, the impact of record numbers coming through our urgent and emergency care, the RSV in paediatrics, so more paediatric patients coming forward, potential flu, goodness knows what else. And then you add to that the Treasury trying to, get a financial settlement with the NHS. You can see we're in a interesting place. But I'd just like to commend the team, the execs and the whole team actually on the work they're doing, because it's been extraordinary. And I've been very pleased to see that during August people have been taking time off, and that staff are taking time off. But as Simon said, of course, that does then impact the numbers of recovery, except for recovery, etc., because you just can't do everything at once. But people did need their holidays. Absolutely. Okay, so we'll move on now. The next item, 7.1, Anu, is the membership.
Yes, this report just reflects the changes in the membership of the Council of Governors. It just, as we're aware that Tom Allen stepped down from his governor position at the end of May, but he was up for election this year, so it's all part of the election process. We've had a few changes on our appointed governors. Denise Saliagopoulos has taken over from Rose Chandler as appointed governor for Spelthorne Borough Council. Mark Adams has taken over from Iftikhar Chowdhury as appointed governor for Runnymede Borough Council. And we have also Neil Adolphus has recently advised of his stepping down from his governor role due to the numerous pressures on his time. And most of these will be covered off in the elections with which the process is currently underway. We're also looking to appoint somebody from the rest of England this time, and we're looking for one governor in that role. And we are also having a by-election in Elmbridge due to the sad death of Bertie Swan. And the rest of it is just further detail if anyone has any queries on that.
Thank you, Anu. I see you've promoted Spelthorne to be a county council in the report. I'm sure they'd be delighted, but I'm not sure that's accurate.
Oh, apologies for that.
So any questions for Anu on that? All in hand for the elections, I think, is the summary there. Okay. All right, thank you, Anu. So we now move on to the strategy section, and just to say before we start that, as I said to the governors before on the informal meeting, when you raise the various queries and Danny brings them to myself, Anu and Sal, we're trying to get the more operational queries dealt with in either the informal meeting or indeed the meeting with the NEDs, and have this as a more strategic meeting. And given what's going on at the moment in terms of the big picture, I think that's absolutely right. So in terms, Tom is going to give us an update on the strategy refresh, but I thought I would just lead in with regard to what's happening at kind of national level, ICS level, and I'll leave Tom to talk about place level and below. But I sat in along with David this morning on the system assurance group for Surrey Heartlands, and I think, as you know, the health bill is progressing through Parliament. It's in committee stage and it's being lobbied by all sorts of people at the moment to see what will happen. I think the smart money seems to be that the ICSs and the will come through that, and that we will have what's called integrated care boards, and then the partnership board with the local authority. I think the noise is all about the Secretary of State powers and the ones he's seeking to have additionally, but we will see. I think in terms of Where the pressure will come as a result of the national thing, it will come down into, manifested as well through money, on collaboratives and the various collaborations, both at acute collaboratives, the ones we already have at BSPS, and obviously the place-based collaboratives. And you can see that this will accelerate. And I think it will accelerate for various reasons, obviously for clinical and good patient outcome reasons, but also for money saving reasons. So I think that, you know, the good collaboration we already have going with the Royal Surrey will stand us in good stead, because it's not just about Surrey Safe Care, it's also about various getting it right first time initiatives. What's also happening at the ICS at the moment is they're now recruiting for the ICS chair. I had a chat with the 3 shortlisted candidates last week, and I think the 2 of them were being interviewed today. One of them is being interviewed on the 16th. So in due course, we'll know who the ICS chair is. The current ICS chair, Tim Oliver, was not allowed to stand because that's specifically in the bill that local authority councillors can't become the ICS chair or the chair of the NHS body. But good candidates is all I'll say at this stage. And then once they've got the chair, they will then go for the chief executive and then the other members of the board. And then it will all snowball with 1st of April next year being the target for it all to become legal. But the shadow in Surrey Heartlands, we've made huge progress anyway on the shadow organisations. So that's what's happening at that side. And I think also of interest, you might like to know, if you haven't, that Epsom St Helier has now become part of the group with George's. So that is now a fact, and that they have a group chief exec. The chief exec of George's has become the group chief exec. The chief exec of Epsom St Helier is now the chief exec of London Ambulance Service. So so these things move on. So and we can see, you know, that it'd be interesting to see that whether that George's model, if there's any push for that to be happen elsewhere. But that's what's happening next door in southwest London, and obviously Epsom St Helier is also in Surrey. Part of it is. So I just thought I'd give you that kind of bigger picture background as to what's going on at the moment before I hand over to Tom for the strategy refresh session. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. That's a really helpful introduction and really helpful in terms of setting the scene and context around the changing, rapidly changing circumstances that we're operating in. I mean, we I think took the decision as a board to embark on the strategy refresh almost a year ago, based on the impact clearly that COVID was having on us as an organisation, and anticipating how things might go in relation to the forthcoming white paper at that time and changes to legislation. And actually things are developing really quite rapidly on that front, and the importance, as you've mentioned, of collaboratives and working in collaboration and formal collaboration is something that's really accelerating. So I'm just going to run through a quick presentation for you, and good afternoon to you all, and then take questions and discussion at the end. I know that we're running a little bit over time, so hopefully we'll be able to get through this a little bit quicker. Sal, if you can just go through to the next slide, that'd be helpful. Can you update the slide, Sal?
Sorry, Tom, is that not working?
No, it hasn't changed. No.
Lovely.
This is available for you for you all in admin control, by the way.
Any change now?
No,
okay.
It's still.
All right. I'll stop sharing and I'll give it one more try.
Okay.
Sal,
I'll carry on.
If you stop sharing but share your screen rather than the window, you'll be able to show it.
Okay. Thank you for that advice.
So I'll keep talking through, and the slides can catch up. So essentially, we decided to do a strategy refresh to update what we know is essentially the right strategy, but not mentioning COVID in it, and not being up to date with the new policy framework, the long-term plan was published a few months after we published our strategy back in April 2018. We felt needed to be remedied, and so the main objectives really of doing the strategy refresh were to pick up the importance of infection prevention and control, to take the opportunity to engage with our public, to really re-understand what they felt was our role within the new context. Obviously recognise the importance of COVID. And part of, as we've already said in the meeting, and colleagues will be well aware, is the part of the response to COVID really highlighted to us the importance of staff health and well-being. So we wanted to make sure that that was properly reflected in our strategy. It gives us the opportunity to look at our clinical strategy, given the impact of the pandemic and the new policy framework, and again working in collaboration that may well have on how we organise our clinical services. And given that we're a couple of years off doing a full strategy redo, we thought it was a good opportunity to do it at this time. The scope of the strategy refresh was quite. We decided we would set that out very clearly and limit it really to those elements that were to do with the aims and the vision of the strategy, not looking at the overall values of the organisation, and looking in a bit more detail at the individual strategic objectives, but we wanted to keep the 5 strategic objectives as they were. However, if there's clear feedback through the process of engagement that the values or the individual strategic objectives needed to be reviewed, then we would do that. But so far, that hasn't really happened. So it looks like the scope of the strategy refresh will remain intact. If you just go to the next, maybe move on 2 slides. The overall engagement methodology has been to engage with colleagues, with partner organisations, stakeholders, and to engage with our community, predominantly through our membership. And the plan is kind of represented on a page here. I hope that you can read that. And I'll just go from the top. So we've developed a survey for this that has around it a range of resources that we've put together. A number of us have recorded videos, sort of setting out from our perspective what's going on and what the context for the strategy refresh is. And they're available on a resource centre that you can access via our hub, our website, sorry, and the survey is there. We've heavily publicised that and pushed that to our staff. And we've carried out now a number of members events that have been very well attended. We've got a couple more coming up next week, and we've promoted the survey through that, and we've had a pretty good response. I'll give a bit of an update on where we are with that. The members really represent the public, but as well as just talking to the members, we're about to embark on a public engagement campaign. We have toyed with the idea, and we were hoping to do some public events, but given where we are in terms of the community levels of COVID, we wanted to make sure that we decided it wasn't appropriate to do any in-person events around this, and so we're doing a promotional campaign, really trying to direct the public to the survey, and that will give us additional responses to the survey, as well as the more detailed input that we've had from our members, who of course obviously themselves are members of the public and represent the public to us. We've had a number of sessions with various members of staff and various staff groups, as you can see there. We're about to embark next week on a series of stakeholder events, which are really based around the individual strategic objectives. We, as I've already mentioned, have had a number of members events. So quite a comprehensive approach to engaging and having the conversation around our strategy. And these next 2 slides really just set out what we've done so far. So we've already had a number of events, and we've got an awful lot more still to happen in September. And I expect that the engagement process will draw to a close probably in October, and then we'll start the process of analysing. Just to give you a kind of interim update on how the feedback that we're getting. So there's some kind of interim survey results here. We've had 120 responses to the survey so far, which is pretty good. We need more. So we just at the start of the summer we did a push again into the staff We've got a QR code that you can use to access the survey. And now that people are starting to come back from their summer holidays, we're going to be doing that again, probably in the next couple of weeks. Every time we have a team talk session, which we do every 2 weeks, we promote the survey. So we're getting pretty good response. In terms of the responses, they're pretty much half and half, staff and non-staff. And it seems pretty clear that the overall people think the strategy is still the right strategy. There are people sort of saying we need to make big changes to the mission, the vision and the aim. So that's quite reassuring in many ways. But there is a sense that we need to make some changes in terms of increasing the priority around infection control and around staff health and well-being. We anticipate more detailed, I guess, input around the strategic objectives as we move forward next week into the focus groups with our stakeholder organisations, so professionals who are involved in the specific areas of work that are underway within our strategic objectives. So we expect more detailed input to those areas to help to finesse and update those. The next slide, if you can just go to that, really sets out the broad timetable, which I think we'll be pretty much on track with. We may well be, as I say, continuing some of the engagement stuff towards the end of September and into October, but we should be into the redrafting and analysis in October, and then moving forward to the approvals mechanisms towards November and December. If you can just go to the next slide, this is just to give you a flavour of the kind of engagement material that we've been putting together. The comms team have done an absolutely fantastic job of this, and I'm really grateful to them for the support they've given to me in terms of holding these events and putting them on, and the graphics are really helpful, and we've dug out some of the old videos as well to bring them back and use them as a way of illustrating the strategy to people to set the scene for those events. And those discussions. The next slide, the outputs are, as I've already mentioned, the refreshed strategy document, which we should be getting in December. We're also hoping to develop out of this a refreshed clinical strategy. I mean, we don't have a documented clinical strategy, but given the changes that are afoot now and the thinking around the location of services, which really started in earnest during COVID, when we were trying to work out how to pursue our North Star objective of, eliminating infection by not bringing people into risky areas like St. Peter's, which is an emergency centre. This is what's led to the move of services out into the community, the move of the elective services into Ashford. So there's quite a detailed clinical strategy, which probably will come out of this. And then to support the implementation of that clinical strategy, and a state's master plan. That's the end of my presentation. Very happy to take any comments or questions.
Thanks, Tom. Questions on the refresh, or kind of wider on the strategy piece that I covered at the beginning. So, right, we've got a forest of hands. Chris Marks, you were first.
Oh, was I? Very quickly, Tom, having attended the first of the membership talks, and indeed having completed the survey, I wondered if you could talk to the, 37% of the respondents who suggest either agreement or strong agreement with the need for the strategy to change. And I know you've talked a bit about infection control and staff well-being. Is there more specificity around the changes requested?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've still got a long way to go, Chris. I mean, I'm hoping to see much more than 120 responses to the survey. But I mean, you referred to that event. Those two member events, actually, I think you attended the first. They were fantastic, actually. Really, really good discussions. And I'm grateful to you, by the way, for completing the survey as well. And we did get into a lot of detail on those. So we got into a lot of detail around the comms aspect of it. And we've already talked in this meeting, haven't we, about outpatients and how outpatients works. So it's really good to see that work is going on. But how we communicate with patients, both around appointments and when appointments get reorganized and all the rest of it, and things like discharge letters. I mean, all of the communications that go on around the clinical service, I think, require a great deal of focus in terms of improving that patient experience. Patient experience, I think, is still a front runner in terms of being the most important thing to us in terms of our strategy. So communication came out in a big way, and access to services came out in a big way as well. And that was partly to do with the use of technology, as we've already described and discussed, and making that more appropriate to people, giving it its right place in terms of providing clinical services and pursuing clinical pathways. We've already talked about that, but also in terms of the location of services, as has been said, and including we've had some challenges with the access of services up at Ashford, etc. Yes. You know, and understanding that, and making that a high priority in the strategy, I think, is that they're important things that came out. There were also really strong inputs in relation to equality and diversity, making sure that we're getting the right input from the right groups of diversity groups. We've had a number of follow-up conversations actually from those events that have been really, really helpful. And then, I mean, kind of partly to Edwin's point earlier on, the sort of the differential impact of the pandemic on specific groups with protected characteristics is a very great interest to us. So there's the impact to them in relation to how they access their treatment, but also the impact of the pandemic and how that's been differentially felt by different groups. And we're really pursuing that through the work that we'll be doing in collaboration with the local partnership, the place-based work, and trying to understand in the detail of those individual towns, high streets and neighbourhoods, you know, where is the impact being most felt, and what can we do to address that, and what's our role as an acute hospital in this, to make sure that those impacts are properly addressed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Loads of follow-up questions, but I will ignore them for the moment.
Okay, Deborah?
Thank you very much. My internet goes in and out, so forgive me if I freeze. My session was cancelled on this. I'm booked in again next week, so I look forward to that. But as a local borough councillor, I have never had so much interest and so many comments and issues related to access as I am receiving at the moment. And to each of them, I go back and I say, have you been linked into this discussion? Are you involved in it? Have you been invited? And universally, they say no. So I'm just wondering, are we actually reaching out to the wider stakeholder groups? And I'm thinking of these sort of patient groups associated with GP practices, resident groups, and transport groups, and so on, and also elements like the ROC groups, which are looking at pieces of work around our neck of the woods. And obviously in Woking, we've got particular issues as being the furthest from Ashford, and Ashford is notoriously the worst. But I've received 3 emails just during this meeting alone on this issue. So it is quite critical, actually, that we address that and we address it as wide as possible. So I suppose my question is, great that we're doing it. It's brave to do it midway through a strategy, and wise to do it because of the changes. But can we just have assurance that we are engaging widely enough that we're not going to then get hit with comments that we have been too narrow, perhaps, in our participation? So that would be it. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. We've written out to 450 stakeholder organisations to get their engagement in this. And the session actually that you had signed up to, we had to cancel because the number of responses was so low. So we did a bit of a course correction midway, and we've taken a different approach to those stakeholder events, and we are getting a bit more interest. So 450 is a lot, but it won't be all of them by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm very happy to receive suggestions of stakeholder groups, people that we should be talking to, and we will happily send them access to that, and I'll have a conversation with them and tell them what's going on. So please do send them through. Very happy to hear from them. We know the issue of access is a really important one particularly now to the Woking community.
And we have, I mean, just on that point, actually, we've been working very closely with Woking Borough Council to extend the busler service. And I've just got some figures in front of me. Actually, they have run 60 additional trips out to different parts of the patch, to Ashford and also to the Royal Surrey, actually, to provide better access to those places for the people who can't easily get to them. So we're making a bit of progress on that. But yeah, we won't be getting to all of those people on the first hit. So please do send us through the names of the organisations or people that you think we should talk to.
Thank you very much. Appreciated.
Good point, Deborah. Thank you very much for that. Okay, I think that's it. Looking at the time, probably about right, Tom. So what I would say is, governors, you know, if you are getting people who are unhappy or want to express their view, do make sure that their details go through probably to Anu, Tom, yeah, so that they can be invited. It is obviously supposed to be strategy refresh rather than operational refresh, which we have to keep an eye on. But you know, strategically at the moment, we, you know, because of the pandemic, we are set up in that way that says, you know, Ashford is a clean site, so you know, we are interested in people's views on the difficulty. Goodness knows what they would be if they were in Norfolk, because the distance to Norfolk and Norwich hospital. But there we go. It's what you're used to, isn't it? That's the thing. Okay, thanks very much, Tom, for that. Now we're going to move on to 8.2, which is the people thing. Rightly, Louise and I were chatting earlier with Dami. Rightly, the governors nearly always want an update on people, and never more useful, I think, than at this time when we've already heard about staff exhaustion, etc. You've heard last time about the staff survey results. And I think so the first recommendation, right to keep bringing this up. Keep somebody, can everybody mute except me, please? So there's feedback there. In order to get it right, I wanted to kick off and give Dami a chance in a minute to explain to you the assurance mechanism, because obviously governors hold the non-executives to account. And so we don't just want to hear from the executives, we want to hear from the non-executives, and Dami is now chair of that people committee. And you'll get a mixture. You'll get a mixture of things that are already underway, things that are in the governance pipeline. So, and this will always be a very dynamic area, and I'm sure Louise will cover that, what's in the pipeline and not yet signed off. And we're always in that dynamic of saying we can't be presenting things as a done deal to the governors until it's been through the board. So we are in a little bit of that as well. I think also, of interest is the pandemic has put such pressure on people at an individual level, never mind the professional level, but, you know, not being able to go on the holidays they want, not being able to see family, etc. And naturally that has manifested itself in people being less tolerant with each other. And whereas people in the past may have said, oh, well, you know, he's been a bit scratchy today, I'll ignore it. Suddenly there's a sort of harassment thing that comes up. So, you know, I think useful things to explore. But I'm going to hand over first to Dami to explain kind of what the People Committee have been up to in this area. Dami.
Thanks, Andy. Sal, I wonder if you could bring up the presentation, please. Sal or Anu.
Thank you, Sammy. I'll bring it up. It will be in PDF, so bear with me as I'll need to scroll through it.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah, so it's page 2. Thank you very much. So I just wanted the opportunity, along with Louise, to give you some feedback and hopefully to offer some assurance to the governors of what we've been doing on the People Committee. As Andy said, I've only just taken over chairing that in July. But as you know, the strategic objectives for the People Committee is to ensure that Ashford and St Peter's Hospital Trust is a great place to work and a great place to be a patient, where everyone feels listened to, empowered and valued. And that's very much the focus for us in our bi-monthly meetings, scrutinising the strategic risks that there are to this objective, reviewing the KPIs and agreeing the risk appetite. Our last meeting in July, we heard about a few key issues, a lot of which have been discussed already. So the issues around exhaustion, which every member of staff, not just within the trust, but across the health service is feeling, but also the need to balance redistributing our resources in terms of keeping the service going as normal, whilst at the same time recovering and catching up with the backlog that has arisen, as James discussed, up to 90 weeks in many areas, and also giving people the time to recover and to recuperate. So balancing these three risks have been quite significant. We've been seeing, certainly in July, some of the metrics going up for sickness and sickness absences. There's been a lot of pressure on the morale and the resilience, as Andy has alluded to, people not being able to go and visit their loved ones and not being able to take adequate rest time. And then we've got winter coming up. So there is an increased demand with respiratory viruses coming up in the paediatric department. We've got some pressures to increase the resources in terms of staffing in line with the Ockenden requirement in the maternity department as well. And then we've got Surrey Safe Care, the training and the staff engagement. That's going to require a lot of time, whilst we're still trying to achieve 110% target of our elective recovery. Of course, we're aware of the feedback that has been received, so around our staff survey results, the enduring issues that we've had with the bullying and harassment, the EDI, and also the emerging relational issues. Because people are tired and less resilient, of course, we're a bit less tolerant to we're a bit less tolerant of each other, and people are obviously increasingly becoming ratty. So the People Committee is keeping an eye on that, and we're seeking assurances on the strategy and the plans to address these issues, and more importantly, how we move people along from where they are now, this state of exhaustion, to a slightly better place. So there's a proposal that we're expecting to see at the next committee meeting on an inclusive culture programme across the organisation, but we're waiting tech's approval on this. There's also ongoing work on improving people interpersonal relationships and people management practices at divisional levels, as well as even across the board. But I'll let Louise go into a bit more detail, and we'll be happy to answer questions afterwards.
Thanks, Amy. I can't hear me.
It's a bit faint.
You're very faint, Louise.
Let me take it off. Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, slightly better.
Apologies, I'll try and talk up so you can hear me. Okay, so I think my introduction has probably already been said, but I guess it's an acknowledgement. This isn't the issues that we see aren't new, but they have been exacerbated, and I've seen that not just in terms of feedback, but also in terms of things like our employee relations casework, our ability to try and mediate concerns at an early stage and being unsuccessful with that, and finding ourselves in very long and drawn out processes with a number of people who are feeling that their team is quite dysfunctional. So this, as I say, it's not new. We have had this highlighted before, but it does feel like the pandemic has had quite a big impact. And it's not really just new for us. So there's now quite a significant national focus on this piece that people are talking about in terms of compassionate leadership, civility and kindness, and how we make sure that that is at the forefront of how people behave, you know, notwithstanding that their teams are under significant pressure and have been for long periods of time. And as Dami has just said, in the July People Committee, we also heard of the sort of triple threat that might be facing us going forward, with more COVID, potential big surge of flu and RSV, in addition to our demand for services. So it is important to put the context there. This is, you know, we're dealing with a really tricky environment at the moment. But what I'm hoping to do is to just take you through some of the progress that we've made, in particular, you know, the focus that we've been giving to well-being, which you've heard about before, and hopefully you can see that that continues to be something that does dictate a lot of the strategy from the workforce team, but also the thing that we're doing to try and tackle some of those relationship issues, and some highlights from our EDI programme. The next slide just gives you a little bit of an overview of some of the wellbeing interventions. I've talked before about the role of the line manager, and that ability to have the confidence and the tools and techniques to talk to their teams about how people are feeling, to make sure that people are able to have constructive conversations, and where they see that a member of staff might be slightly not behaving as they would normally behave, have the techniques and confidence to do something about that. And we've had 222 people at this point in time, it continues, who've gone through that programme. It's been really, really well received. And it's been something that the wellbeing ambassadors have been able to use and then cascade amongst their teams. And you know, you can't say more than 100% of attendees feeling more confident when they left the training than when they started. So that's, you know, really good to see that. And there's a couple of quotes at the top in terms of, you know, I really like that one about, I will reflect more on the example that I'm setting for my team. If I don't look after my well-being, if I don't ask for help when I'm struggling, then I can't expect my team members to do so. We've also invested quite a lot of time, and in the NHS, time equals money, especially with clinical staff if they need to be replaced when they're taken out of the clinical area, in team away days, where we've been doing reflection and recuperation from the post-pandemic. So we took 156 colleagues from ITU and Aspen and some theatre colleagues away in July, and we got them to decompress and regroup as a team, both in terms of fun things, but also having a trained professional that could talk to them about psychological debrief from the pandemic and how they move forward given the experience that they've had. And again, the feedback was really positive, with people talking about, you know, it does make me feel that the trust actually does have my health and well-being at heart. And, you know, those are people who've been through a fairly traumatic time. So it's really important that we did that. If we go to the next page. Physical well-being is something that we think is really important and that we've concentrated on. At some point during this month, we are going to open our new wellbeing centre. It's only taken me years, but we're going to get there. You know, that will be a fantastic resource for our colleagues on site. But we're also very keen to make sure that our colleagues that aren't on site can also contribute to some of the wellbeing initiatives. We did walk this May, where 200 staff participated in a walking challenge. You know, some feedback there in terms of how it's, you know, had a positive impact on their well-being, and some work that we've done around hydration and making sure that people understand the importance of looking after themselves. So next slide, please. We look at our wellbeing data on a regular occurrence, and this is quite a sort of complicated slide, so I'll just talk you through it. But if in the middle of that slide at the top, the staff survey results for 2020. the Acute Trust benchmark, we were 6.2 out of 10, which, as you can see, is above the average, just a bit under the best, and obviously quite a lot better than the worst. And so the question in 11A, which is the question around the organisation takes positive action on health and well-being, was one of our most improved scores in from 2019. So that's a really good start for us. We've continued to do quarterly pulse surveys, and you can see the difference between August 2020 and May 21 was a slight reduction in people's satisfaction, but it was only a very marginal reduction. And we keep an eye on the wellbeing scores within each division so that we can start to try and use this as a way of triangulating other feedback and other data that we've got, DATIX reports, our employee relations activity, our exit questionnaires, our retention data, and work out, are there any particular areas that we need to help in a bit more give a bit more attention to. And then the information over on the left-hand side is just a bit of data from Care First, which is our employee assistance program. And again, just doing a track of, are people using that? What are they using it for? And is it helpful? We have more data from the Surrey and Borders Resilience Hub, which again is another opportunity for staff to have well-being. So all of that considered, we are seeing an improvement, and we are seeing a continued investment in our wellbeing activities. If we go on to the next slide, so concern in the staff survey, as you know, I think you've seen this slide before. It's obviously, it was last year's staff survey, so it's in the previous divisional configuration, but not an improvement in these scores, and a recurring theme about harassment and bullying, more so in terms of bullying between colleagues, but we asked the question both in terms of colleagues, we asked the question in terms of managers, and actually what you haven't got on this slide is any detail about harassment and bullying from patients, but that is something that we track, and that is something that is also a dynamic that we're seeing at the moment. As people are becoming more frustrated and more anxious about their healthcare, and in particular operations being delayed, we are starting to see the behavioural issues from patients and colleagues getting worse, and that's another dynamic that we're trying to manage at the moment. So if I go on to the next slide, this is an attempt to give you a very quick soundbite from each of the divisions in terms of what they're doing about this, because this isn't for me to resolve. I can't resolve the issues of the organisation on my own. This is a cultural transformation piece that we need to do across the organisation. And for some of those areas, this issue has become more critical than others. So two that I'm going to pick out: general surgery, critical care, anaesthetics and theatres, in particular, are concerned about some of the issues around relationships, behaviours, and the implication that has on people's confidence to speak up and to be assured around safety. And so we have done extensive engagement with colleagues within that division, and that has gone from David and Andrea as the lead clinicians in the organisation, right through to the divisional teams, with a significant number of open forums that staff have been invited and attended. And we collated both the feedback from those sessions, but also triangulated that with the workforce data that we already hold, the data that we can get from our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, but also knowing that some of the issues within this division in particular are being escalated anonymously to the CQC. So looking at the themes range under those three areas that I've just put under that headline: staffing, behaviours and recognition and wellbeing. And so we have a very detailed plan for that division, which sets out a response to all of those issues. And in addition, they will be a pilot for the new culture programme that I'll talk about in a minute, that we're hoping to get off the ground once I get some approval from tech. As of today, they commenced a safety culture review, which is a really good way of engaging people in a conversation around safety and relations. And they're doing that not just as a division themselves, but they're also asking other people who have regular interaction with the theatre division to complete that survey. And then finally, they've recently introduced a really good newsletter, which has got that focus on how do we recognise the positive stories and how do we make sure that we're showing, you know, the progression that we're making as a division. And I think Anu, if she hasn't already, she will share that with you, because I think it's a really good example of how you can, as a divisional team, spend a bit of time understanding the issues and then do something that feels very personal in terms of a conversation with those team members. I'll also pull out specialist surgery and MSK. So that's the division that's led by Zach, Dawn Gantley and Matthew Tambling. They were concerned about feedback that they'd had around behaviours. And so they did their own local survey where they asked for feedback on 3 things that staff wanted to continue to do and 3 things that they wanted to stop in terms of behaviours. And the outcome of the survey has then been fed back to the team. So they've had a number of meetings where they've fed the outcomes back to colleagues, and their follow-up actions will include quite a creative comms campaign within their area about those positive behaviours that they want to reinforce. And actually what they fed back to us at a recent exec and division review meeting was that even just the act of doing the survey and then feeding those results back to the team has already started to improve people's psychological safety. And they've made comments about they feel more safe to speak up, they feel more safe to call out the poor behaviour, because it's there, you know, sort of in black and white as a behaviour that they've all identified they want to stop doing. So if you just go on to the next page, Sal, so they had 228 people responded, and they asked 2 questions, very straightforward, and this is the kind of response that they got back. So, you know, being able to play back to people, you know, this is what, you know, you co-created this, you've said this is what you want to reinforce in terms of good behaviour, and you've said that this is what you want to stop, and having the opportunity to then sort of, you know, hold people to account for that, but in a creative way. So the work that they're doing to create posters and engagement and communication is really good. And the next page is a screenshot of the general surgery anaesthetics critical cares newsletter. Please do read it, because it is great just in terms of how they've done that. And again, within that newsletter, it talks about speaking up, and it talks about, you know, people having the confidence to do that, but making sure that people are doing that in a proactive and positive way. So this following slide is an attempt on my behalf to do a brain dump of everything that I've diagnosed as being the issues in the organisation around this agenda. And it's quite difficult to do that on one slide, so bear with me, I'll try and explain it. But for me, it isn't just about team dynamics, it's more than that. There's a number of factors that if we want to find ourselves in a position, you know, this time in 1 year, 2 years time, feeling like the culture of the organisation has had that transformation, then there's a number of areas that we need to work on. The first is the piece around improving people practices. So in layperson's terms, that's what do we do when something goes wrong and we need to do an investigation with a member of staff? Or what do we do when an issue is raised of concern about somebody's behaviour? And at the moment, we have very traditional grievance and disciplinary policies that often take a very long time to transact, are often incredibly costly in terms of time, impact on people, both in terms of their time and their mental health, and quite often lead to an outcome whereby no formal action is taken, and every party that's been involved in it comes out of it feeling worse than, you know, than they did when they started. So a real investment in our time in the workforce team, working with the divisional leaders to completely change how we do that. And if we are going to do that, that will require some investment. But actually, the investment, the sort of return on investment in terms of time spent in disciplinary issues, time spent in tribunals, cost of legal advice, you know, all of those things will need to be considered when we present this case to TEC. But it is about trying to invest in our managers so they can nip things in the bud, having a preliminary investigation process where people are able to do that quickly and are competent to do that, having a triage process so that it isn't just one person making a decision, but it's an expert panel, etc., etc. So a big piece of work around improving people practices. Our second programme is around improving our diversity and inclusion practices, and my final slide just gives you a bit of highlight about what we're doing with the EDI. But we know that from the feedback that some of the experience that staff have is disproportionate if you are somebody that comes with a protected characteristic, such as, you know, you are gay, or you are from an ethnic minority background, or you bring difference to the organisation. And we know that people's experience is less good. We also know by looking at things like our workforce race equality scheme and our disability equality scheme, that those people tend to be less successful in being promoted and less able to access training and development that would give them the confidence to apply for those more senior posts. So a focus around improving our diversity and inclusion practice. The third piece is that piece that I talked about around people relations. And if you take theatres as an example, you know, we've spent a lot of time looking at their wellbeing surveys, their themes from Freedom to Speak Up, DATIX themes, and we've translated all of that data into a narrative about what's happening. We've then played that back to the team so that we can get a sense as to whether or not people are experiencing that. And our next step with them is to come up with an OD programme where we identify actions that will resolve some of those cultural issues. We're talking to a number of providers of that, including organisations like Civility Saves Lives, which is all about how do you demonstrate respectful relationships, and how does that in turn improve the safety of a department, which in turn improves the patient outcome. So we will be identifying the intervention and we will be doing this piece of work with a number of divisions, starting with theatres. And then the final piece, and we always go back to this, is so much of this is connected to the competence of our managers to be able to deal with things in a really good and timely way, and how do we improve the capability of our leaders. The Leadership Academy is just about to launch a programme called the Leadership Way, which is all around leadership competencies, and we really like that. So we will probably adapt something like that rather than trying to invent something ourselves. But it's very much about what's the investment that we need to put in to leadership development that will enable us to move forward in terms of the compassionate culture that we're looking to try and make sure happens across the board, not just in pockets of good practice. So finally, the last slide is a slide that just gives a bit of a highlight around the EDI agenda. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we're working on an annual report. So we every year we will produce an annual EDI report that goes to the People Committee in September, and then it goes ultimately to the Trust Board. So for any of the governors that are interested in that, then please join us at Open Board in September, and you'll hear me present that annual report. And if you remember from last year, we try and do that in a way that's quite accessible, because some of the workforce race equality and disability equality data is sometimes quite intangible to understand. So we're trying to interpret that and reflect on what we think that's telling us in terms of the journey around EDI. But we have spent, hopefully, you know, you will have seen this year a number of things that we've been doing, in particular, really working with our staff networks and giving attention to how we increase the allyship in the organisation and how we educate ourselves as to how it feels to be different and what actions people can take on a personal basis to make sure that they are educated, informed, and they are contributing to a positive culture for all. But I'll pause there, Andy. I've probably gone on too long already, and there's probably
no. I mean, if you stop sharing, please, Sal. I mean, I'm aware we're 5 minutes over, but we will catch up on the closed. But I just thought that was so valuable in terms of getting the governors up to speed, that it was well worthwhile going over for a few minutes, because it really is. Without our people, we're nothing. So, you know, the people actions, and you have been privileged, I would use that word, to see something that hasn't gone through tech yet, and it hasn't gone through people committee or board yet. So these are, you know, this is just demonstrating to you that the team led by Louise is really thinking about these things and being very innovative, in fact. So let's do just a few questions and then we'll have to move on. So Chris, you're in first again. You've obviously got a very good buzzer there.
Consider it a starter for 10. Louise, outstanding as always. Thank you. And I would echo exactly what Andy said about innovation, reinforcing what Tom said earlier about the importance of communication. Bringing it a little bit back into the numbers, apologies. Given the passing now of the settled status date, I wondered if you could give us an update on the number of staff who applied for settled status, and a little bit perhaps around the number of people who've been recruited, the number of leavers, and potentially even the number of staff who've determined to take retirement, just to give us a picture of where things are in terms of, dare I say it, voting with people's feet.
Yes, I'm not going to be able to, haven't got all of those figures in my head, Chris.
Oh, Louise.
I can certainly share that with you. Actually, to that last point, one of the things that is in our broad assurance framework narrative is the risk around the flight risk issue. And we've been talking about this at the People Committee for about 6 months, and, you know, looking at the trends, looking at the stability metric and looking at the turnover levels. And whilst they haven't significantly gone up, they are starting to go in the wrong direction. And we are concerned that people that have stayed on and, you know, have experienced a really difficult 18 months are now starting to think about what's next for me, and maybe it might look different. So I volunteered the organisation to do some work as a pilot with the South Regional NHS Improvement Team around flight risk, because they've been doing some assessment about how do you forecast what that might look like. And I don't think they've quite got it right, so I've offered to be part of it because I think it's really interesting for us to be a bit more on the front foot in terms of forecasting what that might look like. So I'll come back to it at some point in the future with just some detail around that. I think in terms of the settled status piece, we presented the data to the People Committee in July, and we haven't seen a mass exodus of people leaving. There's this whole sort of complication in terms of, you know, we haven't got the right to ask people for evidence that they're able to continue to work, because that would be seen as discriminatory, because they might have had settled status and had it for years. So we are reliant on people coming forward, and, you know, the paper that went to the July People Board gave the detail in terms of how many were outstanding. But what we were concerned about was, will that result in a loss of workforce? And we haven't seen that. So we put mitigation in place, you know, in areas like housekeeping and catering, where we know we've got quite a significant number of people that we'd recruited from overseas. What was the contingency plan if they started to see lots of people, you know, saying that they hadn't got settled status and they were returning to their home country? And we haven't seen that.
Good.
So can I suggest maybe, Andy, at a future date we come back and look at some retention stuff, because I think I'm quite interested in that forecasting piece.
Yeah, I think we can do that. We've got all the facts and figures. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So the three people with their hands up, Julian, Shirley and Edwin, will take your questions and then we'll have to call this bit to a halt. Otherwise we'll be here very late tonight. So Julian's next.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Louise. Excellent presentation. I was just relating it back to the BAF report. And there's clearly 3 risks in there under people, and clearly a lot of the other risks are pertinent and obviously require good people engagement skills and the availability of people. James spoke earlier regarding obviously the pressure that's on urgent care within the trust, as well as planned care, as well as diagnostics, as well as cancer. Is it possible to bring to future meetings what we're doing with regards to the other 2 risks that are identified in there? So making sure that we've got the right workforce requirements in there and that we're actually able to retain and recruit staff, please.
Yeah, so I mean, Dami might want to answer in terms of how the non-execs get assurance around our mitigation of those risks. As you've said, the presentation today has talked mostly about risk 4.2. In the workforce report that goes to the people committee, we set out that whole report under those 3 risks. And so we talk about what we think the emerging risk is for, say, recruitment, and then we would talk about what the mitigation is. And so, you know, if people are interested, we could share the detail of that, but that's how the people committee gets their assurance around mitigation of those risks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Julian, thanks. Shirley. We can see you, but we can't hear you.
It took a little while to come off mute. I just wanted to say, Louise, I think that is an absolutely superb range of initiatives that you're embarking on. And I think you've just about attacked everything from every possible angle. So absolutely superb work.
Thank you, Shirley. I mean, the slide deck I've had to cut in half after Andy saw it. So you've only seen a flavour of some of the things, but hopefully, as you say, we've captured the extent to which we are trying to think about this as broad as possible.
Yeah, as you talk to it, though, it's pretty obvious you've considered a lot of different things in the pieces of work that you're doing. So well done.
Thank you, Shirley.
Thanks, Shirley. That's called doing a Bertie. So that's very positive. Thank you, Edwin.
So like Shirley, just a quick comment. Yes, I was really pleased to learn about the Inclusive Culture Programme and the focus on equality, diversity and inclusion. Thank you, Louise and the team. And I've realized as I was listening to your presentation about the importance of emotional intelligence. I mean, we all do our kind of degrees and postgraduate degrees, but a lot of us don't really read much about emotional intelligence. And I'm just reading a book on emotional intelligence, and it's really, I think I would recommend in all situations, in teams and, you know, between colleagues, between patients and staff. I think somehow we need to raise that level of knowledge about emotional intelligence. And I've read that basically, especially in senior and very senior roles, emotional intelligence is probably more important than, you know, qualifications and kind of technical knowledge and intelligence. So thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. And to that point, we did a board away day at the end of June, and one of the ambitions of that away day was obviously to regroup as a team, as we hadn't seen each other for a while, but it was also to look at, you know, what happens to teams when they're under pressure. What happens to teams from a, you know, in terms of those dynamics and those behaviours, and how can we, you know, just sort of being aware of that and aware of what that might mean in terms of us as board colleagues. And it was a really both positive but also useful session, I think, for us in terms of that, thinking about, you know, how you know, regardless of the pressure that we're under, the way we then transact our jobs and the way that we transact our conversations with one another does have a real impact on one another.
And just say it was a really great away day, and did say something that we chose to focus on those subjects, and modesty prevents me saying whose paper plane flew the longest on that day. Okay, so thank you, Louise. That's really great. Thank you, Dami, for your intro there. I'm going to move us on now. Any other business? I don't think we've had anything nominated. Okay, so the date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 8th of December, and at this stage we think it'll probably still be virtual. So so I'm now going to move us on quickly to the closed. I think there's no need for any of the non-execs to stay for this if they don't